You look at this entire model minority myth that's been created about Indians in the United States, and by many measures, yes, there are, I guess, some achievements and professional success on a personal level. But as a community, what you showed is two things to me. One is the community has zero power, right? They cannot even, legitimately protest against outright Hindu-phobic narratives that are being pushed onto their children in schools, universities, and everywhere else. And secondly, I find that, perhaps we haven't done as good a job as we should. In fact, we've done not much, maybe only a little bit, to build, and invest in public intellectuals like yourselves. So let me ask you this: has anybody ever offered to sponsor your research? I mean, like, for example, if you are a rising leftist star, you would get perched in a university with a named chair and you'd be set for life with tenure and grants and all kinds of stuff, right? Has anybody even come close to offering that to you? And if not, why not?
No, let me put it this way. When I think of the community as readers, fellow participants in this movement, as custodians of our children together, it takes I guess, it takes a village to raise a child. Now it takes an Agastya Gurukulam to raise a dharmic child, I guess, so communities, in this way, it has been very wonderful. I've learned a lot. It is from the community, after all, that I've learned about Voice of India and so many things which were never taught to us inside academia. Mm-hmm. But the community's understanding of the mainstream world is so lacking, and it's a very strange thing because there is this image that the community has, and of being very successful and very influential, particularly here in America. Everyone thinks, Hindu-American lobby, it's like the Jewish lobby or the Arab lobby, it's happening and all that. It is such a self-deluding myth, and it has been weaponized against us, and we can talk about that later as well. So what has happened is now, around 2015, 16, I would say till 2015, even if somebody, from Hindu organizations or something emailed me, I would keep my distance because I honestly did not know anything about them. Because I saw myself as an independent academic, trying to create a voice for, from a critical Hindu perspective inside the academia, So just like all the other communities did. But eventually, when I did decide that as a public intellectual, it was my duty to also engage with, the broader Hindu community and, various Hindu organizations and so on. What I realized is there's a lot of hype, and there are a few people who are, as individuals, who are very sincere, who've done a lot of great work. But the dynamics that seem to go around the Hindu community academia interaction, particularly with things like setting up chairs or things like that. I mean, it's a huge. I don't know whether to call it a farce or a hoax. I mean, they're both strong words.
You got to call it for what it is, right? And the track record speaks for itself, which is there is no track record to speak of.
Yeah, because it's as simple as this. We've seen at least 3 communities acquire representation for themselves in this country. One, the first, I would say, if you look at World War II and in that period, the Jewish community, which had faced tremendous oppression and genocide. Mm-hmm. A community which Hindus often say, that there are role models and all that. They were very clear about the kind of support they would do. and then more recently the Arab and Muslim communities. The support they have done for making Islamophobia a mainstream idea and so on. Now, there's a couple of things that are going on. One is the big ticket support, like setting up chairs and things like that, which to the community or some people of the community tried to do, but somehow, did not even realize what was going on. The broader issue is, it's not just the big corporate people like, the Infosys man who gave millions of dollars to a Sanskrit Nazi theory person, it's not only that. I mean, there's a lot of, upper class Indians who do things like that for vanity, okay?
Yeah.
And a misguided sense of preserving a culture, I guess. But, even the average middle class Hindu in America who is working so hard, putting their kids through 10 years of SAT and Kumon and whatnot to get into
these.
Yeah. All of us are funding the Pollocks and Donegers of the world with that, because, what happens at the end of the day, we are all legitimizing these institutions or this, ugly, yeah, because I'm not saying, let's all go live in the forest and do our own thing, although that's not a bad idea. Who knows? The way things are going, we may all have to learn farming and, sustainable agriculture and yeah, but these days, in order to even have a forest to live in, you have to earn a little money so you can buy land, right? Otherwise, I mean, where do you have, so we need to be in the real world a little bit. But what I'm saying is, as parents, either we are not aware of what's going on, or even if we are aware, at the end of the day, it's like we end up supporting these institutions. So long story short, yeah, I can't say I've received the kind of support a normal community would have given a normal scholar in this position, because and nothing comes without strings. That's the other weird thing in this community. Usually I think in any other community, people would have a good understanding of division of labor.
Right.
So if you're the person who's not in academia, but you're a good organizer or you're a philanthropist, you would say, okay, I'll support this research, I'll support this platform being set up, and I'll take pride in seeing you doing your job well,
Yeah.
But here it's not the other way. It's like, I want to be out there being seen by the community as the savior of Hinduism or something like that. Now, if you're good at it, fine, that's fine, do it.
Yeah.
But many people who do that are very, very sloppy at it. I've seen so many moments in the last 5 years, where this kind of thinking has damaged and weakened, possible Hindu victories.
Yeah. Well, hey, well, like you said, we have to focus on what we can do today and going forward. And that's part of the conversation here, is to really just learn and understand what it is that we can do, rather than moping over, what hasn't been done so far. Let me jump into your books a little bit, because I got to tell you, my daughter loves your books, and they're amazing, literary device in a format that I think really speaks across ages. So let me do that. So your new book, the Kishkindha series, seems to have an uncanny resemblance to things that are going on in the world now, with people hiding in caves or fighting with survival or whatever. Can you share a little bit more about the two books, Saraswati Intelligence, as well as, and let me show my copy of Firekeepers of Jwalapuram, which my daughter absolutely loves. Why don't we talk about those two books, the trilogy that you're making, and how it sort of is allegorical in its nature and reflects what's going on in the world.
Yeah, so the first book was this one. So Saraswati's Intelligence, inspired by Hanuman, and then the second book is, so I've sent you a copy, by the way, so autograph. And so this one is The Firekeepers of Jwalapuram, which just came out a few months ago. So I began writing this trilogy in 2013, and my father was very excited about it. He really, if you remember that was around the time the whole quote unquote mythological fiction genre took off, with Amesha's, Shiva novel and everything. And I found it very exciting because it was a very new way of retelling the stories, which were both contemporary, but at the same time fairly, respectful and tried to bring out the same ethical universe. So I started working on Hanuman at that time. And so Saraswati's intelligence takes place in a land called Kishkindha, which is in my novel, it's basically like prehistoric India, and there is amazing civilization, and very, very simple. They live in the caves and in the forests and everything. They're simple, but they have this quote called Paramadharma, which means don't spill any blood, and they're living in a wonderful, fairly idyllic life. And then there is this mysterious invasion that is starting to take place, and a lot of the elephants are being attacked. So basically, Saraswati's intelligence is about the invasion of Kishkindha by a new species, which later will be called the unbalanced ones. So because all the Kishkindhans have balances, and the balance means tail. So the unbalanced ones are like this new species which invades them, and they're very, very violent. So that's the story there. Part two picks up, where part one sort of ends. And part two actually, so there's a volcano on the cover. It's actually a reference to a real historical event and a real site, a real place in India, with a lot of significance to the question of Indian origins. And that is the town of the village of Jwalapuram, which is in Kurnool district, not very far from Mantralayam, incidentally, where you lived for a while, Raghavendra Swami's holy place. So Jwalapuram was actually, my father told me of Jwalapuram because he had read that there was this amazing research that was done there, which proved continuity of existence before and after the Toba volcano explosion of 70,000 BCE.
Wow.
Okay. So in 70,000 BCE, there was a volcano in Indonesia which erupted, covering, a huge part of Asia with this volcanic ash. There was, mass extinction, all these things. But some people or early people, whatever species they were, they survived. And the proof of the survival was discovered by a great archaeologist and friend of mine, Professor Ravi Korisetar, who, dug under this, like 10-foot trench cake of volcanic ash and found the same kind of tools above and below. So forget this silly, Aryan invasion stuff. I mean, our Indian history textbook should be starting in Jwalapuram 70,000 BC. But anyways, I've digressed into textbooks, but okay, so the story now is there's this volcano explosion and Hanuman and all his friends are surviving acid rain and, crops and plants and trees dying everywhere, plus all sorts of politics taking place within the family and, with all these invaders coming. So book two, the strange thing that happened about book two is most of book two takes place with people surviving a natural disaster. So they're hiding in caves basically in order to survive. And now 1 week after my book comes out in early March, the whole world has now gone into caves.
Yeah, well, truth is stranger than fiction, I guess.
Yeah.
Good. No, it's fascinating. And so let's explore this idea of Paramadharma a little bit more. I mean, it's central to your theme. Do you think it's relevant today? And what events or experiences led you to think about it?
Yeah, so Paramadharma is just a play on the word ahimsa, as you can guess. And I think it's most important idea for us to think about. I mean, beyond the sort of shallow Gandhi Malala, poster, in turn into. No, I kid you not. In American campuses today, so that's sort of how the iconography goes. It's Gandhi and Malala. So I mean, Gandhi till Gandhi King, it made sense, and now it's Gandhi King Malala, and so anyway, Paramadharma. So ahimsa, I think, is a very, very important tool for us to understand a situation in the world. It's not just about behavior, and it is really, first of all, about understanding. And so in the novel, I've sort of set it up as what happens when there's a code which is very, very rigorous, So actually the series begins with Hanuman being banished for a Paramadharma violation.
Fascinating.
Yeah, poor Hanuman, who anyway, so and then you actually have the species which has no concept of Paramadharma. In fact, book 2 actually takes us into this new regime that comes called Pragati Dharma.
Right.
So now this book 3 is going to see this conflict between this new establishment which has an ideal called Pragati Dharma,
Right.
and the way they're setting up Pragati, and again, the parents here will appreciate this, is by setting up this new institution called the school. Where Kishkindhan children are forced to tie up their balances around their waist, or their tails are beaten or burnt, and so it's connected to present times. So I was interested in this idea because I was reading quite a bit about animal rights, speciesism, and this whole idea of anthropocentrism, right? Because in academia, especially in my field, we're talking all the time about race and class and gender and all that. And really, the big question is speciesism. How does the modern world, claim to be for human rights and everything, and at the same time pretend, animals are just objects, are just there for our dominion, And even now, even after all the catastrophe that's happened these last 5 or 6 months, that is the elephant in the room nobody's talking about.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Fascinating. So then, why Hanuman? Why did you pick on the Hanuman character? I mean, I find fascinating the idea of Hanuman being banished for a violation of Paramadharma code. I mean, maybe we are going into a world where even Arjun might be banished. Similarly, in today's world, if the thought police had their way of enforcing the Paramadharma. Tell me more about your choice for using Hanuman, and how does this trilogy is different from the first novel you published back in 2010 with Penguin?
Yeah, so it's very interesting. So let me show you my first novel too. It's called The Mythologist, and you can see the film strip and 3 hummingbirds. So The Mythologist was inspired by my childhood growing up in a movie star's family. My mother was in movies, and she acted in many great, movies about Krishna and Satyabhama, and so this was about essentially the role of these stories, and I mean, which typically, in the modern world, are called mythologicals, and of course, epistemologically, we see them as anything but myths. So this whole book is sort of a reflection on what it means to believe a story, and so it starts with this childhood in a great Telugu filmmaker's family, and then how the film industry changes and how this guy comes to America. 9/11 happens, so lots of different stories over there. So this book, Mythologist, was very much in the tradition of. Okay, I'll just recap that because it got interrupted. So The Mythologist was very much in the tradition of a literary novel, in the sense that it's a novel where the form the form is probably even more important than the content. In a sense, the language, the words, invite you to soak it in and enjoy it. So, which is why there's Salman Rushdie or Amitabh Ghosh and all are appreciated, because it's not just the story itself, but it's attention to the form of it, and that actually, in a sense, is something I like to do. And that's what I did in Rearming Hinduism as well, because even though it was a partly academically inspired book, I think the attention to art was there. But Hanuman was more straightforward. It was, in a way, I challenged myself because I wanted to keep it more action-oriented, which was new for me, and tried to keep the writing as straightforward as possible. And why Hanuman particularly? I don't know. It's interesting. So there were so many novels coming out about Shiva and Krishna and everyone, and for some reason Hanuman was just waiting for me. No one picked Hanuman.
Nobody claimed it.
Yeah, and my father was very keen on it.
Right.
Because it's one, he was a zoologist, so he had this whole Hanuman and prehistoric world, pre-human world thing, and also because my father was very fond of the whole Dvaita tradition, and Madhvacharya is believed by Madhvas to be a sort of an incarnation of Hanuman. And then I visited Hampi once in 2005. That was the first time, and when I went, I thought Hampi is Vijayanagara historic, but then I realized it's not just historic; it's sacred. Hampi, it's like Kishkindha. It's Hanuman is everywhere, by that sacred river. So yeah, Hanuman is sort of my prayer for reclaiming Kishkindha for the whole planet.
What I'll add, though, I think what from my personal experience, what's been really great is we're always looking for good books for our kids to read, and if they're going through normal stuff, they'll get onto this Disney stuff and the mainstream literature and things that they will grow up. Typically we start with Amar Chitra Kathas, and then but there's a gap, right? Like once they outgrow Amar Chitra Kathas, for the age ranges between 6 and 12, there's not a whole lot of literature that we could find, at least available here in English, that would then give them the kind of a different perspective and different storytelling, different style that we would like them. But I found your books fit that, and they've been a great transition for my kids to go from Amar Chitra Katha to start reading your books. So thank you for doing that. On the line, I know you already touched upon it a little bit, but would you see we have this great tradition of historical fiction, particularly in Indian languages. Unfortunately, again, as we are losing our languages, and as I call Indians functionally illiterate in their mother tongues, at least the upper class, the educated, English medium educated class. There are great, amazing authors like S.L. Bhairappa, or wrote in Kannada, or Kanhaiya Lal Munshi, whose work I'm familiar with because he wrote in Gujarati. There's amazing, sweeping historical fictions that just open an entire new world for you. So what do you think is the difference between writing something like that, which is very creative, which sort of combines historical narrative with how it may be allegorical in some sense, and relates to the current situation today, as opposed to writing a more like a, say, non-fiction work like Rearming Hinduism? How do you compare and contrast those two forms?
It's very interesting. I'm actually very grateful you're asking me questions about the writing process, because it's very interesting. I think many of us are functionally literate in our native languages, and I think many of us are only functionally literate even in English. Mm-hmm. Our relationship to English for most of us is answering an email, putting some smiley emoji, surviving the insanity and absurdity of corporate management communication.
Yeah.
And, which is fine, but, there is beauty and depth and, I guess, mysticality, for lack of a better word, even in English, if you really get into it, right? Mm-hmm. And we don't see that anymore. I mean, I think Sri Aurobindo was, I mean, the little that I've read of Sri Aurobindo, you suddenly realize he's writing in English, but, this is like a trance. You're going into a trance, with the words. It's out there. These words are, this is not office email, CC.
English.
No, this is some Sanskrit, Vedic, forces of the universe English,
Okay.
So, I don't know. See, because I took to writing, again, as I said earlier, as a form of, I think, and maybe I don't know if I should call it meditation or expression or what it was, but something happens when I write,
Right.
small Facebook post or something. And I go into these words with a lot of attention, a lot of engagement, meaning, intensity. And sometimes, they turn out to be very, very useful, for readers, and not just in a practical way, but maybe in an emotional, spiritual way too. That's my hope. And Rearming Hinduism really was very unusual because I wrote it in just 3 or 4 weeks, in early April 2014. Yeah, I wrote it in 3-4 weeks, and I had a wonderful editor at Westland, who is a textbook leftist, by the way. But I don't know why, he was just blown away by that book, and he said, "Look, I'm going to go. I know the left has lost credibility and everything." And I mean, he didn't say it, but I knew that's kind of what he wanted to do. He fought for that book, and because everyone else said, "Oh no, Wendy Doniger, how can we?" Come on, if you guys are fighting for free speech for her, what's wrong with Vamsee's free speech?
Yeah, but no, we already know that their whole free speech is only for people whose speech they want to promote. It's not for those who are not fitting the established narrative.